In my Spark 3 review, I talked about my excitement for the impending wave of indie games inspired by the 6th console generation. I'm just gonna call the PS2 generation because, come on now. And I knew there had to be more examples already out. There are loads and loads of new indie games released every day on Steam, a few of which are even not porn games. And so here are my findings. 5 PS2 era inspired indie games available now on Steam that I'm gonna put in an ordered list because it's YouTube. Even though they're not in any real order. And also, I'm just going to tell you right now, one of them Spark 2, because I like Spark 3. I'm also not going to go super in-depth on any of these games. I more so just want to present the premise and give my thoughts on their execution. Most of these games are pretty cheap, and most had less than 500 reviews at the time on Steam. So if one looks cool to you, go ahead and give it a shot. I also found a few in-development games I'll briefly mention together in one section at the end. Most of them years away, but with devlogs you can follow, and a few of them even have demo builds available for free. First up is Anima Gate of Memories, a dark fantasy hack and slash in the same vein as Devil May Cry and God of War. I've also heard it called Budget Near, which is a fair description. This is a Spanish game based on a Spanish tabletop game with tons of lore behind it that I know none of. You play as the bear, who, along with her flying book Austin Powers, must defeat the converging powers before the things happen. The story is not much, it's just an excuse to get you to fight all the bosses. The gameplay is solid enough. You have your very typical DMC clone moveset. Launcher, Stinger, Drive. Noticeably, your main ranged attack is instead an OP magic orb you should be spamming in every fight. The moves are there, everything's just a bit stiff. Not quite as smooth as even Devil May Cry 1 was back in the day. But you still have enough options to have some fun. One of the first things I had to do in-game was turn on inverted camera to get what I view as uninverted, which is the most PS2 thing I can think of. The opening prologue section here is a bit linear and lackluster. It shows off some of the worst the game has to offer, and I recommend pushing past it with this in mind, especially since the voice acting can be pretty hit or miss. Sounds like there might have been a few Fiverr jobs done here. None of them are particularly awful, but the inconsistency in their mixing is hard not to notice.
Give me the artifact. I will not ask again.
Unfortunately, I'm not finished with it yet.
Apparently one of the characters is voiced by YouTuber Moist Critical, which I didn't recognize him, so I guess he did a good job there.
I wish you luck. We probably won't meet again.
Once you get to the prologue boss, Austin Powers transforms into Mungo Tungus, and you get your second character.
Monsters. Those are no monsters. Let me show you what a real monster is.
You can switch freely between them in combat with their own resource pools. He's a bit faster with his emphasis on melee and hers on magic, and overall he's a much more fun character, but I enjoy the switching a lot. Finally, after the prologue, you're whisked away to the core, where the game really picks up. I love the look of the core. Really it brings me back to areas like the Tower in Devil May Cry 3 or the Nexus in Demon's Souls. You get Symphony of the Nighted, which at first was really disappointing considering the combat already felt a bit basic. But then you're introduced to the skill tree and given enough XP to get most of those powers back, or choose to drop a few and try new skills, which is actually a great idea, I think. The core is a more open-ended hub area that connects you around the different arcanums, each boss's world where you slowly learn about their backstory before fighting them. All in all, Anima has some really rough edges, but it also has a lot of soul to it. If you like this era of dark fantasy action games, you should check it out, just maybe on a sale. Eternal Radiance is part visual novel, part action RPG. The developers seem to specialize in solely visual novels before, so it's cool to see how good a job they did with the combat system. Which is also surprising considering how buried it is under mounds of visual novel reading. I can see the running around a 3D town version of these parts working as the opening to a JRPG, but put into a visual novel format with no voice acting, not even sound bites before the lines, it's just so much text before you're suddenly plopped into a different game. Now, I'm not saying skip all of it. Honestly, the main story's dialogue isn't even bad. It's just so much of these side conversations, and front-loaded. Then the real game begins. The combat is like the Tales of series, with some souls thrown in because everything does now. You've got your light attack, a heavy attack that breaks guards and also restores mana, that you then use on your 4 arts. You've got the usual block with a parry, but also counter edge with a good dodge. You've also got your standard RPG equipment, setup, skill tree. It all works out to a very satisfying, if incredibly familiar system. And listen, not to be mean, but playing this right after Anima made this game feel like a platinum game. It was so smooth. The animations are just so much quicker and flow better. The game is mostly running around these empty maps, fighting small camps of enemies. Some maps are better looking than others, but the combat is fun enough to incentivize starting these fights anyway. The goblins may look like they came out of one of those humble bundles in the $1 tier, but who cares, the game is fun. Eternal Radiance is kind of like the yin to Anima's yang. Where Anima's stiff combat was elevated by its interesting dungeon and aesthetic, Eternal Radiance's boring style is saved by its much better feeling combat. I was surprised to see you gain NPC party members eventually. It's not something I like in every game, but here it really helps to make battles feel more lively. And when you have a complete party in one of the better looking areas, it can really hold its own to those action RPG classics. Eternal Radiance is probably the biggest surprise on the list for me. I can recommend this game to any action RPG fan, even if you have to skip the dialogue, but if you like VNs, hey, maybe you won't. Lunacid is a bit of an odd man out on this list, since it's very clearly inspired by the Kingsfield and Shadow Tower games that were mostly on the PS1. But both those series ended on the PS2, and also this looks way better than those PS1 games did, and also I just want to really talk about it. If you're a huge FromSoft fan like me, you've probably gone back and tried those early games, and you've probably bounced off them immediately. They're slow, ugly, their crypticness makes modern FromSoft games look like a Ubisoft game in comparison. If so, Lunacid is a game meant for you. A first-person dungeon crawler with an immaculate sense of style, cryptic puzzles, and labyrinthian level design. Lunacid removes just the right amount of jank from those games with surgical precision, removing too much and you begin to lose what made them special. Combat feels more like Shadow Tower, with a faster pace and limb targeting system. Once you put a few points in your speed and get some of the cooler weapons, combat actually starts to get pretty fun. It also does Shadow Tower's spell ring system, but with no durability. And the spells can have some really cool immersive sim-like effects. You've got your standard fire and lightning spells, but also things like an air dash that can be used to sequence break, which is the stuff I live for in games. Do not make your magic system 3 different colors of hurt. Give your game spells that bring inanimate objects to life, but all they can do is scream in agony. The music is also top-notch. I love the song titles and composer credits that come up when the tracks change. Makes the game feel more like a playable music vibes video at times, with a VHS and Vaporwave filters to boot. Some stuff does clash tonally, like this anime demon waifu character, but that's really not a big deal if here or there's some inconsistency. Overall, the experience is stellar. Lunacid is still in early access, so there's still a lot more of the game to come. But for the current price, if you're a fan of the exploration and cryptic puzzles of FromSoft games, you will be as hooked as I am. If you didn't see my Spark 3 video, the TLDW is, it's a better Sonic adventure, with stylish action combat. That largely remains true for Spark 2, save for simpler combat and less overall content. It's always hard to judge a game after playing its better sequel, but it does have a few areas that I think it does better than Spark 3. Spark 2 has more cutscenes and a more fleshed out story, but I gotta say, it still feels like nonsense to me. It helped close up a bit of 3, but it's mostly its own story, the story of Fark. Spark's a Metal Sonic, who has his own Metal Shadow. You can see how in Spark 2 more dev time must have gone to the cutscenes, whereas 3 went to the bonus levels, as 2 is a much shorter game without any side content, which honestly I might prefer. I tend to like streamlined experiences over a bunch of filler of similar tasks. The music is once again a standout. but Spark 2 being the precursor is a step down in a few ways that 3 addressed. The primary offender is the combat. It's just much less developed than it is in 3. You've got your basic brawler attacks and a nice parry, but not much more unless you change forms. There's even less of a reason to fight rather than continue on right past any enemies that spawn. Like I said in my Spark 3 video, it's still a better melee combat system than most games. But it does just make the game more fun to play by running past all the enemies rather than fighting them. The levels themselves also tend to be more linear, with a few notable exceptions, but maybe it just feels like that because 3 had more levels overall. The look of them also goes for a more stylized, gamey look to the platforms, which I think really works, but I also enjoy 3's more grounded look. I think Spark 3 is a better game overall, which makes sense, but Spark 2 is still a great game for the same reasons. I'd still 100% recommend both 3D Spark games, but I'd recommend you play them in order so you can enjoy 2, then feel how much better 3 is. But also, who knows, to each their own. One of the most defining aesthetics of the 6th generation is the beach aesthetic. This was all over the place. Mario Sunshine, Jak and Daxter, Destiny Islands, Final Fantasy X. It felt like every console had a flagship title that at the very least started you out on a beach. Even down to the consoles themselves, with the Gamecube being codenamed Project Dolphin and the PS2 having the iconic wave sounds in its BIOS. Wavetale is a chill little adventure game where you water slide between islands alongside your wacky grandma on a boat. Obviously the first thing you think of is Wind Waker, with its cartoon shading and open ocean to explore. Though I will say there's less freedom in the exploration of that world, and fewer islands to discover. I love the low poly characters with their 2D faces. They have so many great expressions, combined with excellent voice acting that really made the characters stand out with this one.
You know, sometimes I just wish that Granny would accept that things have changed. This is what we're stuck with, right?
I saw, and there was... Oh, this is not good. Not good at all.
While the models are great, the animations can use some work, especially the combat ones. Combat certainly is just there. It's very basic, which could have worked with a little smoother animations, but either way, it's not glaringly bad. Something to do between the platforming, which is the main focus between the story. But this is a game all about movement, and there it exceeds. You run foot in foot with your shadow friend across the water, where you can run, jump, dive, add grappling hooks and slides into the mix, and you can chain some really fun combos together. I feel like things could have been pushed a little bit further than what it does, but like I said, this is mostly a chill, relaxing game than some sort of hardcore platformer, so I get it. Wavetale is also a very short experience. If you're someone who tries to budget games on an hours per dollar basis, you're best waiting on a Wave sale. Okay, now let's go over the in-development games. Keep in mind, most of these are going to be years away from release, but you can follow along in the meantime. First, I have to mention anything inspired by Kingdom Hearts, and for that we have 2 projects that have gained some attention, Luminous Realms and Blood Crisis. Luminous Realms so far looks a lot more like Kingdom Hearts, but it's intended to be open world with some cool looking climbing mechanics. You can follow along the devlogs here on YouTube, and even try out a basic combat demo by joining the game's Discord. Blood Crisis visually seems to take a lot more from the edgier PS2 era, with dual edgy protagonists with sword and gun. I really dig it, with a devlog 2 on the way. There's an endless amount of PS1 style survival horror indies out there, and sure, the PS1 is where survival horror started, but we all know the PS2 is where it peaked. Hollow Body goes for that era of design, the Silent Hill 2 and 3. I think going for the PS2 era graphics really pays off in the added detail to the environments. Next one I have to mention that you can also play a free build of right now is Genos Kids. Of all of the action games I've played for this video, this is easily the best feeling and has insane style. A co-op hack and slash game that has you switching between members of a crazy band while running. It's got so much soul and polish for a 2-person development team, you have to give it props. And that's all I got for this video because I'm currently crouched in a closet and I hate hearing my own voice. But have you played any of these games? Got any more PS2 inspired games? Let me know in the comments.